I've done a lot of videos in this channel about mental health, and that's why the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp trial has been very interesting to me. And I did a TikTok video which seems to have struck a nerve with people because it's got over 100,000 views so far and a lot of comments from people. And the reason I did that video was that it kind of shocked me that the whole mental health system and mental health analysis is being used and abused as a tool in that fight between these two parties. I have a separate video which will cover hostile diagnosis of Amber Heard, which is equally shocking, I think, in this trial, and that's something I'll do as a separate video. The American system is a very adversarial one anyway, and can be quite tough and real root canal kind of stuff in the courtroom. But it's kind of shocking to see the mental health system and mental health professionals being paraded in to be used, and they quite willingly are, in a kind of way to either boost up one side or destroy the other. And I don't think that's putting too fine a point on it. And one in particular, the very first instance where the mental health undercurrent, constant theme and undercurrent of mental health in that trial happened was when Johnny Depp's doctor testified on the trial and gave that long list of mental health disorders that Johnny Depp had. And I did a video on this channel recently about 200, that we have 200 plus mental disorders now, mental categories. So the DSM, which is the kind of Bible that psychiatrists have, has exploded over the years. So it started off with a small, manageable number of mental health disorders that people could have and be diagnosed with. And this has mushroomed now to over 200. And the list is now, quite frankly, ridiculous. So where it started with depression and anxiety and things that we can all understand and kind of relate to, and now it seems every aspect of our personality has been boxed and categorized in and packaged as a disorder. And it's very questionable, to say the least, whether that is doing any good to anybody or whether it's doing more damage to people, where it seems that people's characteristics, just as basic personalities, what makes them human and what makes them different from people, is now being pathologized and being turned into a disorder. So we now have over 200 mental disorders, and that's in a video that I did recently. And really, it couldn't have been illustrated more by that testimony by Johnny Depp's doctor.
Doctor read a long list of disorders he's been treating the actor for.
Primary dopamine imbalance, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, bipolar 1, depression secondary to above, insomnia, chronic substance abuse disorder.
He underlines 6 different disorders that Johnny Depp has. So primary dopamine imbalance disorder, ADHD, bipolar 1, depression, chronic substance abuse, and insomnia. It's an utterly ridiculous, exhaustive list, in my opinion, and a lot of it is contradictory and a lot of it makes no sense. And even it's just looking into somebody's personality and saying, well, that bit of you is this disorder and that bit of you is that disorder, and we're going to put a label on that kind of thing that you do and put a label on that kind of thing that you do, and split up your personalities into 6 different categories, and this is, you know, your 6 categories labeled. It to me, it makes absolutely no sense. And in fact, it makes a kind of a mockery of the system that is supposed to be helping people with challenges in life, because that's really what it boils down to. And what we're doing is taking people's personalities and a lot of what makes us different and pathologizing them into disorders. And I sometimes wonder if geniuses like Einstein were to be put through the system now, they would probably be sidelined and assigned 8 or 9 different disorders. And of course, the other thing, while I think about it, is that while every one of these disorders then has an associated medication associated with, so a lot of the people, and through the years, my own struggle with mental health, I've been to a lot of support meetings, and they have helped me an awful lot, and I hope I have helped other people by, it's the best system I find, because it's peers getting into an empty room with just chairs and a table and talking about their own experience and sharing their own experience. I have seen many counsellors and psychologists over the years as well, but I never got as much benefit from the old one-on-one dealing with the so-called experts as I did from being in that room with other people who were going through similar experiences to myself. And over those years, I would have heard of a lot of people would describe their own categories and their diagnoses as well. But always as well, what shocked me was that each one was then given a particular medication. And usually most people there would be on 5 or 6 different medications for mental health alone. And then they would sometimes be on others for physical illnesses. And all of them interacting with each other and in an absolute nightmare. Usually I would try and restrict it to one medication, and even then the side effects sometimes of antidepressants can be horrific. So people would be given, they'd be depressed, so they'd be given an antidepressant for that. They might have bipolar, so they're given lithium for that, and then they might, that isn't working, so they're given an antipsychotic. And then they might be anxious, so they're given a Valium on top of that. And then all of that is driving them a little bit crazy, so they're given a mood stabilizer. And, with all that chaos going on at the edge, they might just throw a Xanax on top of that as well. And then, of course, they can't sleep, so they're given a sleeping pill as well. So that's 6 or 7 straight away, and it seems to be very quick to that 6 or 7 medications. And I can only imagine, I feel so sorry for these people who are going through hell on earth. And sometimes I've wondered, is the hell that they're going through because of their original illness that they presented with, if you can call it an illness, or is it because of the over-medication and the insane over-medication that the mental health system is doing to them? So a lot of those overdiagnosis. So it really struck a chord when I saw that diagnosis of 6 different mental disorders just being trotted out. It brought back memories of listening to other people who have been through that mental health system and have been stamped on the forehead with all of these different disorders, presumably under the guise of helping them through life. But I sometimes wondered, was the opposite going to happen? And in the Johnny Depp case, you have those 6, and the one that stands out, I suppose, is chronic substance abuse disorder, which is addiction. And I've seen people close to me go through addiction, which destroyed their life. And it just, to call it a disorder now is just, it's addiction. It's something we're all prone to. And usually it's something underlying that. It's not the addiction really that is causing the problem. It's a gap, some hole in their life that they're trying to fill, or some desperation. But that was one that stood out to me. Then he diagnosed him with primary dopamine imbalance disorder. So that's the one that I roll the most about, because God alone knows what that is. This chemical imbalance theory is the foundation of almost all of medicine, and certainly psychiatric medicine and antidepressants and antipsychotics and so on, that there's a chemical imbalance in your brain. Now that has been largely discredited over the years, and there has never really been any proof really that there is a chemical imbalance in people's brains. Now, I have taken antidepressants and they have worked for me. So I'm certainly not suggesting that anybody come off anything or you follow your advice from your doctor. But what I'm trying to grapple with is this excuse that the medications are because of a chemical imbalance in the brain. Antidepressants do work, and I've done several videos on this channel about antidepressants and which worked and didn't work for me and so on. But that is a very controversial one. And for him to trot out that one as the very first disorder, primary dopamine imbalance disorder, I mean, really, it's saying you suffer from a sadness. I mean, okay, he's put depression there separately, so that's presumably not what he's talking about in that one. How does he know that? How does he know that he's a dopamine imbalance in his brain? A lot of this is very unscientific and it seems very arbitrary. And really, a lot of it is just dissecting the fact that if this is a human being with trauma, with self-doubt, with all sorts of struggles in life. And they have all come from, a lot of the time, from childhood. And really there's an underlying root, which is just part of your basic personality that is manifesting all of these sort of behaviors in life. And the idea of putting different categories and stamps on it and taking out this particular bit of you and taking out that particular bit of you and saying that, well, that's different because that's primary dopamine disorder and this down here is bipolar 1, doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. The second one that he said is ADHD, dopamine, or the ADHD, the attention deficit disorder, which has exploded in recent years. Sometimes I wonder, do I have it? Because I have a lack of my focus and ability and attention can be very challenged. But everybody, it seems, is diagnosed with ADHD now. And I don't know, does everybody have it? Is there a part of our natural beings? Is it kind of an evolutionary necessity that we would have a certain amount of distraction? Because if we didn't have that certain amount of distraction, then perhaps we would decide, well, I like making carpentry and that's it for the rest of my life. I focus on that, and that extreme focus could be a liability. Whereas that distraction that happens in our brain is maybe a bit of a kick that moves us on to different, hopefully better things, and we sample different things in life, and it's an advantage. That's certainly up for debate. Then he says he's got depression. Okay, that's the most basic one of it. It is the most common disease now, I think, after anxiety in the world, ahead of all other physical illnesses, apparently, according to the UN. And I think anxiety is number 1 in America, but depression we all understand, and I certainly do. That is probably the most basic of the disorders that he's shown. Then he calls it, he says he's got bipolar 1. And 2 things about that. First of all, again, he's separating this bipolar 1 as a different disorder, and I would have thought bipolar is only bipolar because it has depression in it already, and then you have the mania. And so you have depression and mania hand in hand. So the fact that he's diagnosed separately with depression and then bipolar, which has depression in it as well, doesn't make any sense to me. Of course, it's bipolar 1, and to be cynical, that's the more severe one. And it seems a very arbitrary choice, whether it's bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. Again, these categories, I have a lot of cynicism about them and about whether they are effective and have any relevance, and is there any scientific analysis, really hard evidence behind these things. And really, when the doctor trotted it out, there was this sick feeling that it was almost like a sick badge of honor that the doctor had found 6 disorders. You know, he's much better than a doctor who just finds 1 disorder or 2 disorders. He's found 6. 6 disorders. He must be a real expert because he's managed to find 6 disorders. So, yeah. And I have found that with psychiatrists in the past. There's a kind of an arrogance there, and you have this disorder and we're going to whack medication into you and you are going to comply, And then I love the 6th. And the 6th and final disorder that the doctor diagnoses Johnny Depp with is insomnia. And it's another eye roll there, really, in that, you diagnose somebody with all of these disorders and you're throwing presumably a medication for each one of them. So you have 6 different medications piling up, all probably interacting with each other, driving the subject crazy, and then shockingly you notice that they have insomnia. And I mean, that is the first thing that goes out the window, I find, with a lot of these medications, is sleep suffers an awful lot. And I have problems with sleep as well. And my problem is the morning time, is getting up and having that mood problem and anxiety in the mornings. But for other people, it's not being able to sleep at all. And a lot of these medications don't help there. And to throw that on top, like it's a totally separate disorder that he has out of the blue, totally independent of the rest of them, seems pretty crazy. And so a lot of these 6 are just quite shocking, really. And what this is illustrating was really the tip of the iceberg, and what a lot of the people in the mental health system are going through. They're being diagnosed with 6 of these different categories, and they're coming home with these labels. And the question is, are those labels doing any good for those people at all? Or are they doing an awful lot of harm? And I would really wonder about that. And I suppose part of the problem is that it's the over-categorisation now is just lends anybody who walks in off the street could be categorised with any one of, well, several of those 200 new disorders. They capture everything from the way a person sleeps to the way caffeine disorder, I mean, is one of them. The gambling disorders, all of these kind of things. And really, there's a category for everybody in the audience, though. And there's something a little bit disturbing about that. So the whole impression that I get from it, and the interesting thing about this is presumably that doctor was brought in as a sort of a friendly witness by Johnny Depp's legal team in order to give this deposition. So presumably it's done. Why was it done? Is this done to gain sympathy from the jury? Presumably everything that his legal team admits as evidence is done to solicit sympathy from the jury. I mean, that there's no other reason to admit any evidence. And whether this can elicit sympathy from people or not is questionable. The fact that you have all these disorders, it was the feeling that the more disorders we throw in there, the more sympathy we get. There was this stigmatization of mental disorders in the past. And it's a good thing now that has largely decreased, I think. But sometimes you wonder, has it nearly gone the other way, in that this accumulation of mental disorders now is looked on as almost a badge of honor sometimes, or maybe something that's used to get a sympathy in a particular case. Certainly the whole atmosphere and the theme of mental health that's an undercurrent of this trial is quite disturbing. And you don't see many evidence of it being used as a therapeutic tool, but more as a battering ram against the opposition. I have a separate video which will cover hostile diagnosis of Amber Heard, which is equally shocking, I think, in this trial. And that's something I'll do as a separate video. But everything about this trial, and it's kind of a window on the world, really, because normally this stuff is done in private, and now it's out there for the world to see, for better or for worse. But it's a window on what's happening in the mental health system, and it doesn't look good. See you next time.